Hi, everybody. I'm Pasha Marlowe, and this is the Let Pleasure Be the Measure podcast. And as you know, when I talk about pleasure, I'm not just talking about sex and sexuality, but really about how to sprinkle pleasure into even our most challenging of days, which is a lot about reframing our world through the lens of not only pleasure, but humor. And today's guest understands this. And I'm so happy to have Shari Foos. Shari Foos is also a marriage and family therapist. She's a professor and a scholar and the creator of the narrative method, which I'm very excited to hear about. And so welcome from Los Angeles, Shari.
Thank you so much. And I am really excited to be with you. I love your approach and your openness. And it's a thrill to be here today. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, we're going to have a good conversation, as always, unscripted and improvised. We don't have questions. We just go where we go, feeling the moment. And I love those conversations because they're more authentic and organic. So yeah. But it's really cool that we both have a marriage and family therapy degree and you're licensed marriage and family therapist. And so when I was studying back in the mid 90s, mid 90s, I learned about narrative therapy, founded by David White. And so I'm curious, for my own curiosity, what is the difference between narrative therapy and the narrative method, and then even narrative medicine, which I just learned about today? But what is the difference between all those?
Okay. Well, first of all, I was studying at the same time.
Cool.
And we didn't know each other. And I also loved narrative therapy. And narrative therapy, as you know, came from Australia. And the idea was that we are the story that we tell ourselves. So we have the right to, I wouldn't say change our story because that's misleading. It's not as though we are making our story into what we wish it was. But as we mature and get distance from our story, we have other ways to understand it. For example, when you were a child, if you got blamed for a lot of things, you may have gotten the idea that I'm bad. Whereas when you're older, you have the facility to look back and say, it wasn't that I was bad, it's that adult really was impatient or whatever that might be. And as we reframe our stories with the maturity and experience of time, we come to feel more able to inhabit our true lives and be who we really are. So I think it leads to a lot of self-acceptance. Anyway, it was very radical, and it was one of the early postmodern therapies that just sort of stepped away from the idea that everything's about your mother and it's your mother's fault and, the Oedipus complex and all that kind of stuff. So I was very influenced by it. It definitely influenced my style of doing therapy. But to answer your question about the other two, about 10 or so years ago now, I went to New York for 3 years for my kids' last 3 years of high school because life is short and it happened on a whim, and man, it was so cool. So I got to New York and I went through the whole licensing in New York process and opened a small practice, but I still had time. So I discovered narrative medicine, which was a field that was begun at Columbia University, although other people will claim it started in other places. But the program that I went through was started by a physician who was also a literary scholar, and she conceived of it as a way to teach empathy to doctors through identifying with characters. So they would read literature and talk about the characters. And, we've all sort of been hypnotized into accepting this idea that, when it comes to important medical care, who cares about bedside manner? You just want somebody who's a good technician. And the truth is, it's not enough to not understand how to treat people. So everything that we all suspected has now been proven in science, which is that simply having eye contact and getting to know a patient, giving a shit about them as people, understanding their story and connecting that
Mm,
has a giant impact on somebody's following their protocol as
yes.
well as healing. So you can think of an example of a doctor going around in the 50s with a black, bag that has nothing. What do they have? A Band-Aid and an aspirin, but their presence
Yes.
made us feel better. And
Yes.
that's what humans do for each other. We sit with each other. And so that's what narrative medicine is about. But in addition to being geared towards doctors and the medical world, it is steeped in social justice. So
Mm,
being very conscientious of the way we language, the way we talk about patients, or, are patients disabled or differently abled? Who has the right to tell their own story? Can someone
mm,
else speak for someone? And all of these beautiful, deep, sort of additional perspectives to what it
mm,
means to be a patient. And so, based on my experience, both as a therapist and as a student of narrative medicine, as well as just my life as a human trying to work out
yes.
my own stuff. So, this is
Mm,
what led to the narrative method.
huh.
And the narrative method is, simply put, a way for people to connect through sharing their stories. Um, Storytelling is as old as every civilization. Our
Mm,
brains are hardwired to receive stories because it is through stories that we're able to understand. And you,
yes.
as a therapist, know without effort, you remember details in your clients' lives you would never remember in someone else's. And it's partly because you're listening exquisitely,
Yeah.
but it's also because it's a story that you are following emotionally.
Yes.
So essentially, that is a very quick thumbnail of how they are related: the narrative
Yeah.
therapy, narrative medicine, and the narrative method.
Yes, it's so fascinating because our work is so parallel that I believe in the power of a story, and I believe that it connects us and it creates empathy, and that we can be vulnerable together and learn from each other, and get to a deeper level of emotional intelligence I wouldn't normally through the story. And that the changing of perspective in the story, not rewriting it. And I love that you said that, we're, because that I have to define to people as well, that I'm not saying we're going to say, well, I did have a tragic upbringing and traumatic upbringing, but I'm going to rewrite my story as if I was,
I had
born.
great parents.
Right. And rather we're looking at, I see it as like a witness. I'm witnessing my life almost as a movie. Sometimes I even imagine it as a comic strip to make it even more humorous for me. And so I'd picture like my father yelling, but it would be very loud bubbles of, and his head would be exploding like in a cartoon. And
I
my
think I might be your long lost sister.
and my mother, who was German, and you grew up in a Jewish family,
Yeah.
right? But it's interesting that that parallels in a way too, because my family upbringing was based a lot in the shame of being German, and my mother feeling shame for even being born German, and that I was half German. She said, you should be ashamed of your heritage.
Oh my
Yeah.
God.
Hmm. Yes. Even to the point where I don't so much find this funny, but one day she said, "You don't even have a soul." And I'm like, I didn't even know what that meant at the time. I was a child, but it stuck with me. The words stuck with me. And so I've been kind of fighting my own battle to pull myself
Wow.
out of that story. And part of that was me learning about Jewish culture and the Holocaust, and really trying to understand the whole, from all sides, like all dynamics and all the trauma from all sides. And yeah, it was an emotional journey. And yet, as I mentioned to you in the beginning, it led me to my work now, because in reading Viktor Frankl's Search for Meaning about the Holocaust, he talked about the power of stories and the power of stories in community,
Yeah.
and the power of laughter in community. And he said none of it works unless you're gathering with people, and finding uh, in that sense of a tribe and unity, and connectedness, a shared experience. And I just thought that was so beautiful. And now I wonder why everybody doesn't look at the world this way. Do you have this experience? Like it's just so human and humane, and inclusive, that I don't understand why everybody doesn't think this way.
Well, I don't understand why everybody doesn't do everything the way that I think it should be done.
Are
Uh,
you a Virgo too?
no, I'm a
Oh,
Leo.
okay.
Uh, but I love where I put it, and it's really cool when I go back and it's still there. That's just
Hmm.
a personal like. But in any event, um, I think that what you get when you add humor is you broaden your capacity for depth,
Yes.
and vice versa. One of the reasons we have to laugh is because it's so painful. We need a relief and a
Mhm.
release. And that laughter also tells us it's okay. It's okay. We don't have to know why it'll or how it'll be okay, but it's just life. And when you have that respite from intensity, then you can go deeper still. And so to be able to have that balance, I think gives you much more range than if you're always, always trying to be just even.
Yes. And I love that you said that. That is a way to release stress. I talk about the fact that we hold on to stress in our body and how it manifests often as illness. And that moving through the stress cycle includes laughter. It could be crying, it could be dancing, it could be shaking, but also laughter. And if we have all these tools, including one that's so much fun and light, why not try it? Even though it seems paradoxical or counterintuitive on a very dark day. Um, I find that making myself laugh, even if nothing's funny, is that physical release that sometimes feels like a scream, feels like a cry, but also reminds me that I can find the funny in around the parameters and edges of even a traumatic experience. And in comedy, by the way, there's a equation. It's trauma plus time equals comedy. And so I always talk about how we can decrease that time. It doesn't have to take years to feel or find the humor in our traumatic upbringing. We could decrease that amount of time by having the lens and the orientation towards humor from the get-go. And I wish this was something taught to kids for resiliency purposes
You're
from a
so
very young age.
you're really smart and you're really right. And I think there are so many things that kids weren't taught in the past because it just, for whatever reason, the general zeitgeist couldn't pick it all up. But
Mm,
I think now with SEL and appreciation for people's sensitivities, you know, it's hard for all of us to laugh at ourselves when there's shame there.
yes.
But with perspective, if someone is putting themselves down in a way that we all do, then we can all laugh at. Look, why do we do that? And this is such an example. How many people do you know that are not harder on themselves than they are on other people?
Nobody.
And part of it is because we don't really put our shame on the table. So we tend to think that our shame is about us and has to do with our upbringing and the way we think and the blah blah blah. But in reality, if we put it on the table that we are all impacted by the negative messages we get from what I call the cult of culture constantly from social media, advertising. I mean, we all learn we're not good enough. And people rarely say, hey, I'm Shari, I'm not good enough because I just gained weight during the pandemic and I blah and this and that. But if you do dare go there, you
Yes.
will almost always be met
Yes.
with someone recognizing that feeling or having compassion for you struggling with it. And it's just a way that we can be better known. And if
Mm,
we're known, we can be loved. If we're
yes.
not known, we might have an image, but we're alone.
Right.
And this connection that we make through stories and through sharing our pain and our joy and our laughter,
Mhm.
that's what we need to thrive. It's
Mhm.
kind of, other than the sustenance of life, I mean, that is it. That
Yeah.
sense of connecting and appreciating another person and feeling gotten.
Right. Yeah. If our basic human need, all of us, is to feel seen, heard, and known, and we're masking or armoring up and not being vulnerable and showing our true selves, and we don't actually ever feel known at all,
Right.
right?
Just hauling
Yeah.
around the shame that you're trying to defend against. But it's the
Mm-hmm.
exact thing. That shame is an invitation to be part of the human family because we're
Mm-hmm.
all messed up, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something I like to share with people. You think a therapist isn't messed up? And why do you think we became therapists? You
Yes, look
know,
at the graduate class of any therapy school, and you will see people who all have been through therapy. It was mandatory when at Pacific
artists.
Lutheran. It was mandatory that we were in therapy, and to experience it, we're all like, "Oh yeah, we did that, and we'll continue forever." But yes, it's. I think I don't know a therapist who didn't go into it because they weren't also trying to heal from their own trauma. So yeah.
Yeah.
It's an empathetic group of people and currently a burnt out group of people who are overwhelmed. So I think this is a really good tool for therapists as well, because we hold stories, of course, that are limiting beliefs and stories of imposter syndrome and shame as much as anybody. And so we need to use these tools that we're teaching others. But you did mention something and it reminded me of when humor is not healthy in this self-deprecating way. Like we can laugh at ourselves and we
Sure.
could laugh at or with somebody with consent, but we don't want to, in the comedy world, we call it punching down. Like we don't want to laugh at a marginalized somebody who's marginalized or somebody who can't defend themselves or speak up for themselves. But then there's also the sense of if we are using it as a defense mechanism or shaming ourselves because we feel like the only thing we have is our humor. And then in that self-deprecating way, especially for teens, I've heard that there's a big correlation between self-deprecating humor and suicide. And so
Mhm.
I really want to be cautious about it and alert people to the fact that knowing the intention and the impact of our own words to ourselves and to others. But I'm wondering if you uh, come across this issue a lot.
I think a lot of it has to do with the timing, which is something you mentioned earlier. When people are still processing something difficult, it's really hard to get the perspective. It's when you get the perspective that you can move on. And I can tell you all kinds of embarrassing things that I've done once I've processed it and I understand. But if I'm going through it right now, it might be just too delicate because I don't have that clarity.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I always stop people. My work is almost always in groups. And I always stop people when they put themselves down because whatever the reason in the moment is, it's just something that we don't have to do. We can share our vulnerability or our sense of having a flaw with other people, but it's only fair to ourselves if we do it with an eye towards, because like everybody, I'm imperfect and I fall into this trap or whatever it is, but it's just not helpful for anybody. And I think when a therapist shows their true self, because I don't know how you were trained, I was trained, you never tell anything about yourself.
No, very distanced.
I mean, it's so stupid.
I'm with you.
And I know this from having been a patient. When my
Mhm.
therapist told me anything, I felt, oh, I must be normal. So to give you an example, my therapist years ago, and she was great, she helped me in many ways, but I would always hear a cute sounding little dog barking from the other room, like, "Ah, ah, ah, ah." And I would say, oh, I want to see your dog. What kind of dog is it? Then I'd have to spend money processing to her satisfaction why I wanted to see her dog. Screw it. I don't care about your damn dog anymore. But that kind of stiff attitude, let's pretend like you are the only person in the room, when in fact we have two people
Yes.
and what Robert Stollerow calls the third field, which is the
Mm.
thing between us. And
Yes.
all of those things are real. And so I think when a therapist shows you their human frailty, you get better. Because, you know, a therapist sits there and people can make an assumption, well, you've got it together. You're the therapist, I'm screwed up.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, we're all just people on a certain path. And I think what what therapists gain over time is the confidence that they can work through things, and
Mm,
that even if we can't grasp it right now, there is a bigger perspective.
mm.
So I like to use the image of the kaleidoscope. You know, you're looking at the same thing from lots of different angles, and they're all real.
Yes, that's beautiful. And I think that this experience of being able to be vulnerable with your clients as a therapist, I feel like it's new because I know, like you said, when we were trained in the mid 90s, early 90s, that it was discouraged. And even later, late 90s, I remember being a marriage and family therapist in a small town, Connecticut. And my husband at the time, um, was arrested for, I won't say what, but nonetheless, it was public. And I was fired that day for being, this is so illegal now, I hope this is illegal now, because I was too traumatized to understand that I was um really being mistreated. Because if I can't, this was their words, if I can't
You
figure
trust me to
out
marry the
what,
right person?
yeah, if I can't figure out what's wrong with my husband, and I didn't know, it was a secret addiction, I'll just say. But anyhow, if I wasn't aware of what's happening in my own marriage, how could I possibly be a marriage and family therapist and help others? And I knew it hit me wrong, but I was like, of course, that created more shame, and it took me a long time to recover from that. But I remember thinking that I didn't even have the opportunity to have my own human error, and I had to hold space for my spouse and my children's errors too. Like, this is ridiculous. It just, the hierarchy is crazy. And so I really decided at that moment that it wasn't the structure that I wanted to follow. um I remember also a time where I had this is again mid 90s, I wanted to take my clients outside because I'm also a fitness and yoga professional, and I just wanted to walk with them because I thought moving the body and somatic healing and releasing emotion through movement would be really helpful. And I was personally bored sitting in a room, chair to chair, eye contact to eye contact with this kid, sitting across from me, who's talking to me about his trauma. He needed to get like moving and maybe not have eye contact in order to
Exactly, exactly.
no, you cannot, you're not insured outside of these walls. There's the legality. What if the kid trips? I'm like, oh my goodness gracious. So yeah, I'm the red tape or whatever that you call it now. This is why this is a
Yeah.
very challenging profession. But I do believe it has changed and evolved and expanded to include the ability for therapists to be vulnerable, for the ability to therapists to go outside and to move with their clients. So I'm glad to see all that. Um, and people still have trouble going to therapy. And you and I talked about this whole like therapy coach dynamic and
Right.
how to choose and what the difference is. And I know for myself, I rather appreciate the freedom of the constructs of coaching with the knowledge and the therapeutic background. So I know that I'm safely,
Of course.
mindfully, treating with experience. So yeah,
Also, I think the more experience you get, the more you realize, okay, I was trained in a multitude of theories,
mm-hmm,
most of which in some way you integrate or
mm-hmm,
however that may be for you. But at some point, you have to accept, okay, I am a master at this now.
mm-hmm,
And as such, I can take the liberty of following what I have learned.
mm,
You said something I so deeply relate to about not having eye contact, particularly with adolescents, and or other people, or around certain shameful or very difficult conversations. So I'm sure you're familiar with EMDR, which, if your listeners are not, it's a methodology, a tool used in psychology, in which you're basically moving your eyes back and forth very rapidly, as a way to kind of clear an old pattern of thinking. Well, I would take that further and say that the kinds of conversations that you can have in a car, for example, can be unbelievable. You might have said, I love you for the first time, looking straight ahead, or insinuated. insinuating. And I think it's for a couple of reasons. One, of course, because it's less intense
Yes.
to not be having eye contact, but you're completely, fully present with your hearing. But there's another thing that happens like EMDR. And I believe that you are so stimulated when you're driving that you're just getting more and more ideas in a way that is ultimately creative. So in the way that when you travel somewhere, you're looking at all this different stimulation and it's so creative and you're getting new ideas, or maybe you're thinking how absurd it is that this is done this way, where I'm visiting, and so differently thought of where I'm from.
Wow, you are that this is bringing me to an aha moment, because when I drive my son who's still ill to a hospital, we've taken a couple different routes. One is a highway route and one is a back road route, was a little bit longer, but we have found that our hospital visit is calmer and more effective when we take the scenic route. And we initially weren't talking about it. We knew that it was prettier and less traffic and all that, but I was less anxious because of the road. And Jamie, my son, was looking at trees and nature and the perspective of like something in the universe makes sense. And so we finally put words to this just last week. And he said that it's like playing a song in his head. And that if you're listening to one song and you're looking at a tree or an ocean, it sounds different than if you're listening to that song and you're in a traffic jam. And it was like, of course. So anyhow, I know that's a bit of a tangent from what you were saying, but
Not at all. It's
okay.
not only that, where I'm going with that is I'm sure there is no confusion about whether or not he wanted or needed to go through this hell. However, the depth that he expressed in that realization seems like it could only happen from someone who has to think so deeply in order to tolerate their circumstances. And wow, so he's an old soul, and
Yes.
and I would love to see. I bet someone's done research on this. It's so it's just so thrilling to me because it really resonates.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been told that the children who have very serious illnesses at a young age often become healers and often even shamans. So one of my original comedy routines when he became very ill a couple years ago was that I was a shaman mama, because he was a shaman and I was his mama, and just laughing at the fact that I'm not equipped. I don't know how to be a shaman mama, and we were making fun of the fact that he became a different person in his pain, a much more insightful, soulful person that I'm learning from.
Mhm.
But you're right. In order to manage it, he has to see things from a new perspective. And thank goodness he, in the car, talks to me. Otherwise, he's headphones Xboxing, and we don't hardly talk about anything other than food and poop. But when we're in the car, it's really beautiful. So yeah, I take the long way. I take the long way.
Love it. Well, when I am traveling, even within Los Angeles, I just don't go on the freeways. It
Mm,
I am so aware at this point that even though it's subtle and I can handle it, I'm a good driver and all this kind of stuff, but on some really deep level, you are in a state of
yes.
tensing,
Yes.
and I don't like that. I'd much
Yeah.
rather go more slowly.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Especially if we know that our nervous system is already, heightened or fried.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really good message to remind people how much the environment and the context
Right.
that they're in matters.
It's
Matters.
like being chased by a lion. Our
Mm-hmm.
your brain
Mm-hmm.
doesn't know the difference between a real or perceived danger. It just knows that we are hyper focused. Just saying it, just envisioning yourself on the highway, your muscles tense.
Absolutely.
Now, does that make you buff? If it made you buff, it might be worth it.
That's a terrible way to get fit or ripped. My son says, "It's okay, mama. You still look young. You have a six pack, but it's on your forehead." 'Cause the wrinkles.
That's nice, but
Yeah, it's very nice. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, speaking of wonder, I do want to ask you quick because one of your 12 core values is Wonderland.
Yeah.
So what is that about?
Well, Wonderland is the place of sort of lucid dreaming. And
Mm,
I think everybody can define this for themselves. But for me, partly because I had a really hard childhood and I just lived a lot in my imagination. And I have found, even as an adult, that there is so much respite to be gained from going into a state of total comfort and just letting your mind wander where it will. Sometimes I might, say that there's something in particular I want to think about, but more often it's just a journey for me. So I have developed this way of creating what I call a station. So I'll lay in my bed with my arms supported perfectly evenly and my legs perfectly evenly, and I don't feel any part of my body. I'm just a floating head of ideas. And I learned this when I was going through insomnia, because I literally didn't sleep for a couple of years, except for maybe, I don't know, an hour here, half hour there. But I was able to function. And I think it was because I relaxed about not being able to sleep and I went to the movies.
huh.
And I just think that being able to provide for yourself, whether it's more of a formal meditation or another kind of relaxation, but a way to regularly put your mind
Mm,
in a state of what it does best, which is
mm,
this is the biggest supercomputer you've ever seen.
mhm.
And we don't even, I do believe we use our whole brains, but we don't necessarily tap into all of our creativity. And I know this, and you know this, because so many people say, well, I'm not creative. We're all creative. You're
Yes.
creative if you figure out a way to reach the highest shelf using a
Yes.
knife.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
so to allow yourself this relationship with yourself of creativity
Yes.
um, provides a lot of comfort, ideas, and relaxation.
Absolutely. Oh, it's almost like we could give the same, like I feel like you could be giving my presentation that I just gave
I know,
a
vice
week
versa.
ago with similar words, although a somewhat different construct. But I tell people learn to play with yourself. And I know that's a little play on words too, but I say when you're sitting in bed and you have insomnia or anxiety, can you play with yourself? And the fact that can you play with your thoughts? Can you play with words? Can you play with shapes? Can you play with letters? Can you think of things that rhyme? Can you think of a song? And then I said, oh, if I could play with my brain, and it's not my enemy, in not allowing me to sleep, then there's something almost to look forward to. I'd rather be sleeping, but if I have to sit here all night, and rather than the struggle, I can think of words that rhyme, and that helped me so much. So yeah, I call it playing with yourself and imagination, and you call it Wonderland and creativity, but it's all the same. It's all
It
the
is all the
same.
same. And I would also say that um, as a writer, and I started writing as a child, I started writing poems, and it wasn't until many years later that I really realized, well, I'm really serious about this.
Mm.
Because, you don't get an invitation. Dear Shari, would you like to be a writer? Uh, you don't get invitations to any of this stuff. And that's why we have to declare who we are.
Yeah.
But many times I am tired and an idea will come to me, and I always have paper by the side of my bed. And I don't really want to wake up, but I do, because to me, the ideas that are insistent are more important usually than
Mm,
rest. And so I
mm.
jot it down, and maybe sometimes it's nothing in the morning,
Yes.
sometimes
Yeah.
it leads to something cool. So you never know.
Yes. I love those words in the morning are like, really? That's what I was thinking about. But those usually lead to the most brilliant of new ideas and creative thoughts and innovations that wouldn't have occurred had we not listened.
Definitely.
Yeah. I love this. Well, I just want to be your friend and talk to you and collaborate with you forever. But for those that are listening who just want to find out more about you and read your bio and look at your website and follow you on social, how can they do so?
Thank you. Well, go to thenarrativemethod.org and you'll learn all about the narrative method. We work with universities, businesses, and individuals. And we offer 2 free Zoom-ins every week, one on Thursday nights in which we look at videos, people share their stories, and then a writing one Sunday mornings. People come from all over the country, so just sign up and please do come. And we also offer these cards, which are designed so that anybody can put together groups of people to be in a circle and share stories, because you don't need a license to use your humanity.
So are they story prompts, or what are the cards?
They're all based on the 12 core concepts of the narrative method. So you'll get, I'll just pick a random one.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah. Okay, here it is. So this one's based on Wonderland. Get out of here. Everything happens for a reason.
Yeah, sure does.
It's, and then there's first a statement. No matter what, you always have your imagination. And then the prompt is, what is something you would love to achieve but probably cannot? So these are meant to be really thoughtful ways to either journal on your own and challenge some of, the old beliefs you may have had about yourself, or ways to get to know other people. And so that's how you can reach me, thenarrativemethod.org. And I am definitely being your friend. You can't stop me. You're amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so excited. And to answer your question, because I have to complete a thought, I would like to be on Brene Brown's podcast.
Yes.
Yeah. And then do a show, travel around the country and do a show with her. Wouldn't that be fun?
Well, first of all, you should be. Second of all, I don't think that's something that you cannot do. It sounds like something you have not yet done.
Fair enough. Fair enough. That was my limiting belief that that was beyond my capability, or that she would never find me.
Let me just ask you, when you 20 years ago, or whenever you got your degree, did you think you would have a podcast? By the way, did you know what a podcast was?
No, didn't know what a podcast was. And up until a couple years ago, most people who knew me would define me as shy, not quick to laugh, and always anxious. And so I reframed my own crap.
Exactly.
So yeah. So yeah. So there you go.
Come get her. Pasha Marlowe.
Thank you. And until Brene takes up all of my time, if you want to still, get on the waiting list to talk to me, in the show notes is a Calendly link, and I offer a free coaching call. So please take me up on that. And then also you can find me on my website, pashamarlowe.com. And because I have an unusual name, it's very easy to find me on Facebook and Instagram at Pasha Marlowe. So hopefully all you listeners out there enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. I am so excited to have you here and in my life, Shari. And I hope to see you and talk to you again.
Yay.
Yay. Thank you. Bye, everybody.